Will the Detroit Lions draft a player that nobody sees coming and shock the NFL world yet again? Back in 2023, that's exactly what the Lions did, as they selected Jahmyr Gibbs at 12, Jack Campbell at 18, they selected Sam Laporta at 34, and Brian Branch at 45. Four of the least valuable positions in the NFL with your first four draft picks caused a lot of stir among fan bases, among the media, and even among NFL teams talking about how poor the Detroit Lions drafted with the opportunity that they had. But it turned out that drafting the best player available was the right decision, as Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Branch, and Sam Laporta turned into Pro Bowl, All Pro caliber players, while Jack Campbell was the leader of the defense last season and is a severely underrated player at his own position. So the question now becomes, with glaring needs on the defensive line, will Brad Holmes select a defensive lineman in the draft, or will he continue to select best player available and build the Detroit Lions from a talent perspective, even if it isn't the biggest need on the Detroit Lions roster? Well, today we're going to take a look at that. And really, for the first part of it, we'll take a look at the biggest positions of need, as the 28th overall pick is often talked about with very few positions in mind, that being edge rusher and a defensive tackle. Very rarely will you hear somebody mention offensive guard as a potential position of need in the first round, but other than that, it's defensive end and it's defensive tackle. But there are other positions that the Detroit Lions could address, positions that aren't necessarily the biggest need, but could be addressed early in the draft. Potentially middle linebacker, potentially safety, potentially cornerback, or wide receiver, or a number of different positions that the Lions could improve upon, but a lot of people aren't looking at immediately. Now, going into the NFL draft, the positional value argument would land you with edge rusher or defensive tackle, somewhere in the trenches, an immediate impact player for a unit that was incredibly injury prone a season ago, a unit that was really underwhelming a season ago, and a unit that really let the Detroit Lions down at times in 2024. But those guys might not be the best players available, especially if guys like Abdul Carter and Mike Green and some of these really big names go off the board early. By the time you get to pick 28, some of those guys and some of the great players and talents in this class may no longer be around. But the players that will be around could be the best linebacker, the best guard, the best safety, the best wide receiver left available in this class. And those players as talents may outclass the guys that are left at the positional value and positions of need. So, what is Brad Holmes to do in this situation? Well, going back to 2021, it was all about positional value. They selected Penei Sewell at the 7th overall pick. They selected Levi Onwuzurike, Ali McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson, Jameson Williams, Josh Pascal, all with their early picks. The first 6 picks that Brad Holmes made in the first and second rounds were all positions of need, were all valued very highly at different positions, and most of them, with the exception of Jameson Williams, were players in the trenches. That was where Brad Holmes wanted to build this team from the interior outward, and it worked. Penei Sewell was an all-pro. Aiden Hutchinson's a Pro Bowler. Levi Onwuzurike was really good this year. Ali McNeil is a Pro Bowl caliber player. Even Josh Pascal is a really, really good depth and rotational player that gets moved around quite a bit and is impactful for the Lions when called upon. But recently, in years past, especially in 2023, the Lions went with a different approach. With less glaring needs on the roster, they went with the best player available, drafting Jahmyr Gibbs when they already had David Montgomery and DeAndre Swift, drafting Jack Campbell after signing Alex Anzalone out of free agency, after drafting Malcolm Rodriguez and him turning into a really good player, after drafting Derek Barnes and turning him into a good player. The Lions still selected Jack Campbell in the first round because he was the best player. Sam Laporta wasn't the biggest need. Tight end wasn't really a position talked about at the time, and yet they selected him, and he turned into an all-pro. Brian Branch, a player that, again, wasn't really talked about a whole lot in the secondary, was drafted at pick 45, traded up for, in fact, and became an all-pro caliber slot cornerback and safety for the Lions. So positional value kind of went out the window in 2023, but was brought back in 2024. The Detroit Lions invested heavily in the cornerback position, and that investment paid off. The secondary got better, and the Lions got a really good player in Terrion Arnold and a great player in Ennis Rakestraw, whose season ended prematurely. So we go back and forth as Lions fans, and the media goes back and forth quite often about what the best situation would be. What do the Detroit Lions need to do if they want to maximize their potential in this draft? I think it's pretty simple. I think in 2025, the Detroit Lions have very, very few needs, and the best player available approach would be a really smart option. The Lions only really have a few needs, right? It's linebacker if Derek Barnes is to leave, it's edge rusher, it's defensive tackle, and it is the guard position. And there are a lot of players available at those positions. At defensive tackle in the first round, you have Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. You have Kenneth Grant from Michigan. At edge rusher, you have Jack Sawyer from Ohio State. Mike Green at Marshall. You have Princely Numelian, I believe is how you say it, from Ole Miss as well, a player that is severely underrated in this class. There aren't really a lot of options at guard. A lot of those players are day two guys that the Lions could capitalize on, but other players, right? Other players that aren't big positions of need, but could arguably be more talented than the guys we just named are Jaheed Campbell, are Javon Walker from Georgia, right? Cornerbacks, Benjamin Morrison may fall. Shavin Revel may fall in the draft due to his injury a season ago. Do you pass on those players who would likely be top 10 to 15 players had there not be injury, or if their position was valued slightly higher? Do you pass on those guys because of their positional value or because you just don't necessarily need that much of a talent gap at a position? Do you pass on those guys? Do you look at wide receiver and you take Trey Harris or Isaiah Bond? Do you look at safety and look at Xavier Watts or Nick Eminwari, right, from South Carolina? Those are great players who are arguably top 25, top 30 players in this class, but won't go top 25, won't go top 30 because they're safeties, because they're wide receivers, but they could if they were valued at a little bit of a higher positional value. So, what are the Lions to do? Well, I think one thing that a lot of people really forget about is that free agency still has to happen. The Lions are about 2 weeks away from the free agent market opening up, and there are good options. It's not a great class, but there are options at every position. The NFL free agency market opens on March 12th, and the Lions have an opportunity to address just about every single need. They could have drafted edge rusher with a guy like Josh Sweat if he makes the free agency, or Harold Landry in making a big trade this offseason to shore up the edge rushing group. At cornerback, Carlton Davis is an option to re-sign. Charvarius Ward is a potential free agent option. There are other guys out there as well that could be great opportunities, like Paulson Adebo or even Reed from the New York Jets. Lots of really talented cornerbacks in this class. Offensive guard, you could re-sign Kevin Zeitler. That eliminates the need for at least another year. At linebacker, you have Derek Barnes. At safety, you have Ifeatu Melifonwu. You have Ashton Davis. You have lots of other safeties that could be really, really talented in this group. And so all of a sudden, now you go into the draft with less positional needs. And you probably still need an edge rusher because Josh Sweat is unlikely. You probably still need a defensive tackle. But could you wait a little bit longer? Is it worth drafting a Jaheed Campbell? Is it worth drafting an Xavier Watts if they are the best player over potentially reaching on a player like Jack Sawyer in the first round, reaching on a player like Kenneth Grant potentially in the first round, who may not be a top 34 talent, but is, a position that you desperately need on your defensive line? So with that, question being answered, what is the final verdict? Well, I think with the Detroit Lions needs being at defensive line, edge, offensive guard, and potentially linebacker, they could fill a lot of those needs in free agency. And if they do, I think, which they will, I think you go best player available, whether that is Kenneth Grant on the defensive line, whether that is Jack Sawyer, or whether it's Jaheed Campbell, whether it's Xavier Watts, whether it's Siobhan Revel, whether it's a player that we haven't even talked about yet, even a Trey Harris from Ole Miss at wide receiver. Whatever the Detroit Lions have as the highest grade on their roster, that's where they should go. I don't think they need to reach on a defensive end. I don't think they need to reach on a defensive tackle. They have proven the ability to find quality players at every single level of the draft. And with the way the NFL draft is structured right now, there's going to be a high quality player at 60. There's going to be high quality players in the third round, in the fourth round, if they want to trade up, if they want to trade back. There is a lot of depth in this class, but what there may not be a lot of is high-end talent. And high-end talent is really hard to come across if you are a Detroit Lions team at 28. So if you have the opportunity to take an elite player like Jaheed Campbell, an elite player like Xavier Watts over just a good second-tier player like Jack Sawyer, I think there's a really good opportunity to do so. But with all that being said, that is just my personal takeaway. I think the Detroit Lions should go best player available, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you want the Lions to go BPA? Do you want them to reach a little bit and go and force themselves to select an edge rusher to fill that position of need and kind of mark it off the board for the offseason? I'm curious to hear what you guys think. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions in the comments down below. If you've yet to subscribe, go down below and do that as well. It helps the channel out a ton, and we're hoping to grow quite a bit before the end of just the month and before the end of free agency and by the start of next season. So if you could go down below, subscribe, that would help the channel out a ton. Like the video, hit the bell notification so you never miss a Detroit Lions upload. But with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.